So thank you, everyone, for joining today. This is one of our final webinars that the National Center will be offering as part of our time here operating the National TA Center, the National Student Attendance Engagement and Success Center. I'm Veronica Buckwalter, Project Director for the National Center. And the title of today's webinar is Opening Strong. We just had a Closing Strong, and that was in my mind. Today's webinar is Opening Strong. And before we begin, I'm going to share some quick details about today's webinar. Today's webinar will last for approximately 60 minutes with time built in for some questions along the way. And as Dantel mentioned, we only have a couple people on the webinar today, so we've decided to make everyone a panelist so that you can control whether you are muted or unmuted, and that way you can just go ahead and verbally submit questions to our panelists rather than having to use the chat or the Q&A function. You have been placed on mute upon entry into the webinar, and as long as you're not speaking, we do ask that you keep yourself on mute just to prevent any background noise from seeping into the presentation. If you have a question or a comment along the way, just remember to unmute yourself before asking that question so that we're sure to hear you. We ask you, encourage you to submit both questions and or comments throughout the presentation, and our presenter will be pausing along the way to ask if there's any questions or, pausing to interact with the few of you that are on the webinar today. So the webinar will be recorded, and the recording of this webinar will be made available on the National TA Center's website that was recently launched. This is part of the suite of National TA Centers being hosted by the Department of Education. And what we'll do is we'll put that URL up for you in the chat box so that you can access that URL. This recording, as well as all of our recordings from previous webinars, are available on that site, and we encourage you to visit that site and take a look. Next slide, please, Dantel. So today's webinar is one of a number that's been offered by the National Student Attendance Engagement and Success Center during 2018. The National TA Center was launched in 2016 and is funded by the Department of Education's Office of Safe and Healthy Students. The mission of the center is to disseminate evidence-based practices and build and facilitate communities of practice to help students attend every day, be engaged in school, and succeed academically, so that they graduate high school prepared for college, career, and civic life. Next slide, Dantel. The two community of practice referred to in the center's mission are focused on the 30 national My Brother's Keeper Success Mentor sites and the many SIG and SIG eligible schools throughout the country that are working to implement early warning system programs to address chronic absenteeism. At the bottom of this page, you'll see the URL for the center's new technical assistance website. Unfortunately, you won't be able to click on that site within the webinar presentation, but as I mentioned, we will put that up in the chat box for you, and you'll be able to access it from there. All of these webinars are publicly available for your viewing and download at your convenience. We encourage you to visit the website and have a look through all of the great resources and materials that are available for you there. Today's webinar is being presented by Linda Moskowski, the Knowledge Development Director for the Everyone Graduates Center at Johns Hopkins University. Linda has over 25 years of experience in professional development, design and implementation, curriculum development, and instructional design and delivery of site-based technical support. Linda has served as facilitator of the Principals Network Community of Practice for the past 5 years, including the design of semi-annual conference convenings. A proven trainer in leadership development, she co-designed and co-instructs turnaround leadership for the Doctor of Education program at Johns Hopkins School of Education, facilitating synchronous and asynchronous learning opportunities. Linda is also a certified cognitive coach. So Linda, at this point, I will go ahead and pass things over to you to get us started with today's presentation.
Thanks, Veronica, and thanks, Dantel and Amity and Maria. This is very exciting to have such a small group, so please feel free to chime in along the way. You know, the beginning of the school year is certainly a time of excitement, and it also can be a time of nervousness for both students and adults. So it's a time to set expectations and form good habits. As a school creating an opening strong plan, it can set the tone for the remainder of the year. Many schools have a plan for the first day, greeting students at the door, beginning to build relationships, sharing expectations. And it's also useful to think about longer and more comprehensive plans. Today we're going to talk about a 20-day plan to help shape the path for students to the good habit of attending every day and helping to internalize positive behavior patterns and creating good study habits to help them be successful in their classes. So those 20 days can start right now because we know school has begun at most locations. And during this webinar, we're going to talk about how you might invoke a 20-day plan at your site. Next slide, please, Dantel. So I'm going to invite, if you like, Amity, because you are one of our participants, if you wouldn't mind sharing, what planning does your school or district do at the start of the year around attendance, behavior, and course performance? And if you wouldn't mind, you could just take yourself off mute and share what your practices are at your site.
Can you hear me now?
I can, that's
okay.
Wonderful.
Well, I'm in a unique position because I actually work outside the district. I work for United Way in our community. And so what I'm doing is trying to encourage the school and the district to have this sort of plan around these indicators and to find ways to build that into what they do. We have 22 elementary schools, 6 middle schools, and 3 high schools, and then an additional career center. And so what I have done is kind of created some onboarding types of materials for the schools to use to promote the importance of good attendance with their students, and then schools can opt in and use those materials if they want or adopt them, or, you know, so I'm not totally positive what each school actually ends up doing, but a lot of them do like a first month challenge promoting every day on time, you know, and then have incentives for the kids, and then incentives for improved attendance if the students were there the previous year, and things like that, I know for sure. But other than that, I'm kind of tuning in to get some ideas, I guess, is what I'm doing.
That's really wonderful. And as we go along, maybe you can consider yourself a bit of a collaborator, since you provide resources and materials that are parallel to what we'll be talking about. And please feel free to share as we talk about some of the things we recommend. Feel free to share some of the things that you might have found successful as well.
Okay, thank you.
That would be wonderful. Dantel, can we go to the next slide? So some quick facts about attendance and why this opening strong and having something in place for, as you mentioned, Amity, the first month or first 20 days or 20 days starting now can be important. One thing that we have learned is that what happens with absences the first month of school can be a predictor for what the trajectory for attendance is going to be for the whole year. As a matter of fact, half of students who miss 2 to 4 days in September will go on to be chronically absent and miss nearly a month of school. And there's an estimated 5 to 7.5 million students who miss nearly a month of school across our country. Can we go to the next slide, please, Dantel? And by 6th grade, chronic absenteeism is a leading indicator, if not redirected, about which students will drop out of high school. So research has showed us that missing 10% of the school, or about 18 days in most districts, negatively impacts academic performance, and that's just 2 days a month. So oftentimes we might look at that as, oh, 2 days a month isn't such a big deal. So 2 days a month is chronic absenteeism. Would you go to the next slide, please, Dantel? So on the flip side, there's lots of hope that when we do put initiatives in place or put some guardrails for students, that improving their attendance rates also improves their prospects on the trajectory. And when schools engage and students and parents all are messaging the importance of attendance at school, that also helps to improve the trajectory. And another way that we have found that helps students is by providing mentors for chronically absent students. So they have someone to interact with around not just attendance, but a variety of non-academic needs. Okay, next slide. So we're going to talk about opening strong plans that incorporate ideas for teaching and learning, for attendance, for behavior, and that have some, as Amity mentioned, you suggest with your schools, built-in celebrations, exhibitions, making it visible how we're doing and how important attendance is to us, identifying and reviewing existing interventions, and then, very importantly, capturing student voice. Okay, so we can go to the next one. So, opening strong with a focus on teaching and learning would require us to think about what are common expectations across classrooms, and when and how are they taught, and what is incorporated in our positive behavior systems expectations. What is it, or do we have a common grading policy? Do we have common homework policies? What resources might be available and who has access to them? So in many cases, if this isn't planned for, then students and staff are not necessarily aware of who or how these expectations are being communicated. And I just saw in the chat box from Veronica that we have another participant on the webinar. Welcome, Rose Garcia. We're happy to have you with us today. Okay, we're going to go to the next slide. So I'm going to invite Amity and Rose and Maria, as you rally your students and staff and you think about questions, what might be things that you would include or encourage a school to include as things that are important milestones to communicate at the beginning of the school year? We have a few on this slide: course expectations, classroom procedures. Do others come to mind? And Rose, please feel free to unmute yourself. We're a small group and we're kind of considering this a little bit of a dialogue and conversation.
Well, this is Amity, and I guess like goal setting is one of the things that as we're developing our kind of the arm of our success mentoring, that's one of the things that we encourage our students to think about early on in the school year, particularly for the students who are continuing in this school year with their mentor. And so we're encouraging the mentors to talk to the student about, you know, like how did you end up last year, and then what are your own personal goals for this year based on what you're understanding as school's getting started.
Oh, that's an excellent example. For a student going from room to room, that's kind of their lived experience of what school is. So we have found it useful at especially the middle and high school level, where there tends to be, students tend to be moving from one adult to the next, really having a plan about what will look the same across classrooms. That might include things as basic as materials that come with it across courses, or note-taking, or classroom procedures that, when they make sense, if we come together as a team and are on the same page about that, then figuring out how that's communicated and shared with students is another way of shaping the path. The same would be true for how we handle tests or how we handle missed assignments, so that students don't have an uneven expectation across teams, especially in this opening strong period where we're really trying to set everybody up for success. Can we go to the next slide, Dontel? So the next thing in an opening strong plan would really be looking at what's already built in to the curriculum or instructional practices that could be highlighted in the opening phase of school to, again, really support this idea of a strong start. In some cases, planning ahead for a interdisciplinary or thematic unit provides an opportunity, again, for this common messaging across classrooms, as well as opportunities for off-campus learning, especially when we can find opportunities where there is learning that is relevant and of service to others and or the community. Next slide, please, Dontel. So this next slide is kind of a, where do I begin? Since we know it's important to open the school year strong, we've kind of made some ideas, some starter ideas, if you would, on what might be some approaches, some classroom and content approaches that would be engaging and relevant to students. And why don't I let everybody take a moment and then invite you if you have any comments or experiences with any of the ideas on this slide. All right, let's go to the next slide. So let's go through some practices that could be helpful for opening strong at a school. One thing is to intentionally plan to have a space where all of the different partners, such as Amity, you mentioned you're with United Way, and we find that many schools have a variety of partners, both in and outside of the building, really to bring everybody together with regard to the importance of a strong start and have all those voices at the table. To make sure that we include a focus on attendance and that we have a chronic absentee plan that really includes how are we going to support and overcome challenges that students may be encountering that are causing them to not be present. To include a 20-day attendance plan that really sets that tone and includes daily and weekly reflection on progress and success and challenges, and discuss how to support behavior and course performance as we've begun to do here, for example, as with the types of curriculum units we might begin with, and to include celebrations and have in place some support mechanisms for students so that they will all be experiencing success in that opening days of school. Okay, can we go to the next slide, Dontel? And we're continuing with some practices that some of our schools have found successful. Really having the opportunity to think about and bring student voice into what might be celebrations and incentives that students would enjoy, that would help promote a spirit of can-do and the desire to to be at school because it's a place I feel as though I belong. Having, as we said, student voice or student ambassadors involved in that process. And then the other thing that really, while we have school-wide practices, one step closer would be our interdisciplinary teams that support students. So really having a space and a place where teams of teachers that work with students are able to come together to talk about what their Opening Strong plan will look like, as well as having the administrators on site coming together and looking at how the big picture of Opening Strong might look. So now we're going to go into some examples. So on the next slide, you're going to see a picture from one of our schools in Tulsa. This is the 20-day initiative we were speaking about, and this is their particular 20-day attendance initiative. And in this attendance challenge for 20 days, schools are asked to come up with a plan of activities that would motivate students to come to school. And the activities are best served when you gauge student input and have the teams of teachers, just as we talked about on the previous slide, working together. Each day for 20 days, there are activities planned and recognition given to the students that show up. So we're going to look at a couple of the artifacts from this school in Tulsa's 20-day attendance challenge. Can we go to the next slide, Dontel? So this was something that they wanted to make sure that their community and parents and business members and beyond were all abreast of, so they made a point to make sure they advertised as much as possible. And in a few minutes, we're going to look at a short news clip about their 20-day challenge. Some other ways to advertise might include your school marquee, intercom announcements, website, back to school nights. The list, I'm sure, is a short snippet of what we could come up with. And making sure that everybody in the building, all the adults in the building, are on board and understand what the 20-day challenge is about, and of course our students. Next slide, please. So students sign a pledge, and this is a pledge that says they're excited about, and they promise, and they are going to be in school the first 20 days. And so in this case, the school has it on display, which would be a best practice to make sure that it's very visible, the public commitment to come every day. Next slide, please. And then on this slide, you see an example. This is their sample Opening Strong plan. And you can see that for each date, there are a variety of activities that are scheduled. And then there's a champion for each of the activities that are being highlighted. So in this case, there is everything from popsicles at lunch to extra time outside to football game tickets for students who've been present halfway through the challenge to homework passes. And again, this is just a short list of some samples, and I'm sure we could generate tons of additional samples. So the next slide, you're going to get to have a little on your own activity. Dontel is going to put in the chat box a link, and you are going to go on that link and watch a 2-minute video, and then we're going to come back together. So again, in the chat box, there's a 2-minute video link. We're going to ask you, would you click on the link and watch the 2-minute video about the 20-day attendance plan at this school in Tulsa, and then we're going to come back together and talk about it. So I just want to check, did everyone have a chance to view the video? And if you don't want to take yourself off mute, you could feel free to just put in the chat.
This is Amity. I just finished it. Yeah, that was interesting.
Thank you, Amity. Okay. I think our intimate environment might have chased some others away, Amity. I can understand that.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I'm on the web, I don't want to be called out.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's okay. Thanks for hanging in there. On the pictures on this slide, it's the focus on the adults' 20-day attendance challenge. So you see there's some chocolate for adults, there's a money grab. They had a variety of other activities also for the adults at that particular school.
So like the adults as in the staff members or the parents or both?
In this case, it was the staff. So
staff. Okay.
People who were scheduled to be at the building each day.
Okay.
Yeah, but you know, I wonder if we might brainstorm. You know, there are parallels to the kind of did have a back to school night during that time, so I'm kind of sure they probably had some similar incentives for attendance with parents and community at that event.
Okay.
Shall we go to the next slide, Dantel? So this is just, again, another example from one of the Opening Strong plans from schools that we work with. Again, having either a focus on attendance, behavior, or course performance, and all of those things supporting school climate, and then what the activity would be, who would be able to lead it, and what resources might be available. So in this case, we're just really thinking about how schools and teams are looking at their data to set goals, and as they set those goals, then come up with activities that would be aligned, so then they can kind of close that loop and come back around and see if what's designed is having an impact. Because just because people are excited about something doesn't necessarily mean it has an impact. So we're going to go to just one last slide, and that's a checkout activity. And I would invite you, if you like, Amity, to share if there was just one. I know you said you give the schools a variety of resources. Oh, I'm sorry, Dantel, can we go to the next slide? But I wonder, is there one activity that, in particular, that might be like a fan favorite of yours in those resources that you share with schools for Opening Strong? And if not, don't feel put on the spot.
I didn't use the, sorry, I'm kind of blinked out on it. That's why I started talking. This isn't an activity that I developed, but one of the middle schools that I work with and that I host mentors at, they do something similar with the 20-day challenge for their students who don't have any behavioral referrals, who haven't been absent, and it must be around the 20-day mark, because I just heard them announce it in the lunchroom last week that they do like a fun Friday where they open up the school to students to come back, and it's not just a dance, but it's also like ping pong tables that they set up in the hall, and I think maybe a movie in the cafeteria, and they have just different activities that are hosted by school staff that the students can attend. And that seems to be driving attendance, you know, making it a better, their attendance rate stronger, because their data last year was a lot improved over the previous years.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. You know, I think it's so interesting because small things make a big difference. And whether it's in the school environment or the work environment or even our family environment, I mean, really having novel ways to celebrate each other and being clear about what our common expectations and goals are, make for a much more positive and enjoyable environment. So it's really, as we think about, you know, the capacity that people have, it's really just a matter of how might we build that in ways that don't, so it doesn't fall on one or two individuals, so it's not taxing, but really becomes part of the rituals of a community. So I think the one you shared is a great one.
And may I share one more that I just thought of?
Please.
So we might have gotten this idea from some of your materials or something, but about 4 years ago, we started publishing a magnet for students to take home on the first day that's about probably 4 by 6. I mean, it's a pretty good size magnet, but it has the school's start time, dismissal time, and all of the days out listed in a list rather than having to decipher like a district calendar with, you know, all of the variety of levels on it. And then it has a school phone number, and we personalize those here at United Way for each of the elementary schools so that they can place an order with us, and we do all the design and all of that for free, and then they just have to pay for the actual ordering. But it's a bulk order because, like I said, pretty much all of the 22 elementary schools opt in. And I think that's a way, like I just received feedback this morning from a couple parents that was a way where they felt really like, thank you, because then I could screenshot that and send it to my mom who picks up my son, and she really understood everything in just an instant about what she needed to do. So I think that helps a welcoming environment for the parents to understand, you know, all of those activities, and it's really visible.
Emily, thank you for sharing that, because I do think that's so significant, right? Like, how many different places can we make information accessible and visible for each other? Because so many times we think, well, they know, but there's so much to know, right? So what a beautiful idea and gift it is that you guys have created that and made it so that it just, something to make it a little bit simpler to know who needs to be where, when. It's just beautiful. Well, Dontel, can we go to our just last slide? And this last slide is just really to highlight that there's tons of resources that are available at the sites of the organizations we work with, and those sites are listed on the screen. I would really like to especially thank you, Amity, for being really such an active participant and hanging in there till the end of our webinar on the spot. And thank Dontel and Veronica for hosting and facilitating. And also just mention that in the chat box we have over 40 webinars archived, and you can go to the link that's on the chat box right now and access any of them. And I hope that everybody has a beautiful day. And at that, I guess we'll be signing off.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Thanks. It was good to see you.
Chantel, have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.